Super. Right. So good evening, everyone. Good evening. So great to see you all here with us. This is Israel Committee's very first talk in 2022, and I'm delighted to invite our guest speaker, Rabbi Akiva Gersh, with us today. So today we will cover a topic that we do not often think about or talk about, which is veganism. Particularly, we're going to talk about where veganism sits within Judaism. I'm personally, looking forward to finding out whether there are traces or clues of meat-free diet or animal rights within the written text within our religion. I'm also hoping that when we leave this talk, we will all have some questions appearing in our minds, in our hearts about the choices that we make, and the compassion that we should have, not only towards one another, but towards other living things, and also our roles and responsibilities in terms of creating this peaceful, livable life on earth for all its inhabitants. So I'm just going to introduce Kiva and give some information about who he is and what he's done so far and what he is doing right now. And then Kiva, it's you. You start whenever you want. We are ready. So Rabbi Akiva Gersh has been working in the field of Jewish and Israel education for 20 years. His work has included teaching about the deep connection between Judaism and environment stewardship, animal welfare, and veganism. Over the years, he has taught thousands of students through classes, courses, and workshops. He shares these teachings on social media through his vegan rabbi pages on Facebook and Instagram. Kiva holds a BA in Religious Studies from Brown University, and MA in Jewish Education from Yeshiva University, and Rabbinic Ordination from Yeshiva Salam Yaakov in Jerusalem. He lives in Pardes Hana, Israel, with his wife Tamar and their 4 children. So over to you, Akiva.
Even after 1,000 Zooms, sometimes you forget to unmute yourself. Thank you, Liad, for that introduction. Really, really great to be here. I just want to say, as I always do, we're using incredible technology to do this program. And if at any point the incredible technology on my side gets a little weak, please let me know through, just interrupt me and just say, Kiva, I do have a backup Wi-Fi that I can connect to. But we are thousands of kilometers away, and it is pretty much a miracle that we're able to do this. So, I want to make sure that it's as smooth as possible, and so please don't feel shy to interrupt me and tell me that the Wi-Fi is getting a little shaky, and I can try my backup one. But hopefully we won't need that. So again, really great to be here. Quick introduction. My name, as you know, is Akiva Gersh. I'm originally from America, from New York. And I moved to Israel 17 years ago in 2004, and have been involved with Jewish and Israel education now for 2 decades, even a little bit more. I want to give like a little bit of an autobiography just to give some framing to this class and this lecture, this webinar, this sharing, because it definitely does stem from my own personal life experience, and then we're going to get into some sources. So hopefully just a few minutes of a little bit of personal context, and then we're going to jump into some sources and really look at what Judaism has to say about a lot of different issues that relate to veganism today. So I'll just say right from the get-go, my goal here is to get as many of you to start being vegan already today. All right. Just kidding. All right. If that's your personal choice at the end, so be it. But my goal here is to share. Okay. I'm not here to force. I know sometimes people get a little bit scared at vegans, especially Jewish vegans from New York. Forget about it. Watch out. But I'm really here to share and also to listen and to discuss and to talk and really look at the sources. Let the sources speak for themselves. That's what I love about this topic, is that I'm not making anything up. I'm really just sharing sources that already exist and have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and really relating them to our modern day world, specifically as they pertain to human health, animal welfare, and environmental health. All of those three issues definitely having a direct part in people's choices to go vegan today. So anyway, very quickly, a little bit about myself. I grew up in New York. I grew up what I like to say is or was a very typical American Jewish suburban experience and upbringing. I did not grow up very deeply connected Jewishly at all. I know I looked very different than that description. When I was in college, I went through a spiritual journey and a spiritual search, and that search brought me to Judaism in a whole new way. I'll get to that a little bit more in just a few moments. But basically, growing up a very standard American assimilated Jewish experience. I went to public school, which meant I went to something called Hebrew school. I'm not sure if they have that where you guys live, but I went a couple times a week to get some good old Jewish education. That didn't really work. Didn't really work for anybody that I knew of. And unfortunately, my friends and I, we ran away from anything Judaism by the time we were in high school. And that just continued throughout high school. That continued into college as well. At the same time, in terms of my food habits were pretty poor growing up. I literally didn't eat vegetables growing up. I ate lots of meat and lots of carbs, and literally little to no vegetables. My family served vegetables at dinner time almost every night. I just chose never to eat them, and for some reason my parents never pressured me to eat them. So I was really a vegetable-free kind of kid growing up. And obviously that changed at some point. When I got to college, already in high school, I started getting involved with activism, trying to make this world a better place through different organizations, even environmental organizations. I have a twin sister. She went vegetarian in 10th grade. That was a long time ago when it wasn't so cool yet to go vegetarian, and it wasn't so easy either. And, she was a very lovable and likable and popular kid. So people loved her in her high school, but they also had, a good time making fun of her for being vegetarian, as did my brother and me. We had a good time with that. And a few years later, she went vegan. And she told me all the reasons why she went, or a person should go vegetarian or vegan. But at the time, I wasn't open to hearing it, and I wasn't interested. When I got to college, my first year in college was filled with many, many different personal epiphanies about the world, about life, about me, about myself, and specifically about how human beings are affecting the world through our everyday lifestyle choices that we think very little about. And after that year of a lot of thinking and intense realizations along those lines, I decided, one, to become an environmental studies major, and two, to become a vegetarian, because I started to realize how much my eating habits are affecting the world in such a detrimental and destructive way, specifically towards the animals, but also towards the environment in general. About a year later, I went vegan, and that was 1995 when I became vegan. Been vegan ever since. And around that same time, I started a spiritual journey. And without going too deeply into that, I will say this, because it's very connected to what we're going to be talking about here, is that I was done with Judaism. I was done. It was boring. It was irrelevant. It was meaningless. It was archaic. It was outdated. That was my feelings about Judaism growing up until the age 18 about. And then 18 years old, 19 years old, I started to learn new sides of Judaism, which I had never known before. I was blessed to have some people in my life who showed me these things. And the first things that they showed me about Judaism were the environmental teachings in Judaism. I remember I was 19 years old, learning some of these things for the first time, absolutely blown away, shocked and impressed at the same time, and wondering why nobody ever taught me about these things growing up. They weren't so hidden, they weren't so hard to find, but nobody really talked about these things. And I learned more and more about these environmental teachings of the Jewish tradition. And that really opened up the gates for me to explore Judaism in general. I got more and more interested. Again, it's a whole long story, not for now, but eventually I graduated college. I went to Israel a year later, and there's where I found my deep connection to Torah and to observant Judaism, and found myself in Tzfat, learning in yeshiva, and I came back to America, a religious Jew, to everybody's shock and surprise. That was before the internet and social media really took off, so nobody could follow my journey. You know, today, if that happened, I'd probably be like blogging about it every single day. But that back then, it was like I left America. 9 months later, I came back. A year later, and I was all religious, and everybody didn't know why. But for me, it was a very clear, straight path, and very, very influenced and shaped by these environmental teachings in Judaism, specifically having to do with animal welfare and veganism. So that's kind of my personal autobiography having to do with this topic in general. And now I'd like to specifically share some sources with you that really either shaped my journey or sources I found later on. I literally, for 20 years plus, I've been on a journey of finding and collecting Jewish teachings that have to do with environmental stewardship, animal welfare, food ethics, and veganism. And I feel really blessed to have a pretty large collection right now. And I'm going to share a few of these sources with you. If I shared them all, we'd be here literally for like the next 24 hours. All right, so I'm just going to share a few of these with you just to give us a general understanding of what Judaism does say about these topics, about the impact of our food, about animal welfare, about our responsibility towards the environment in general. So I'm just going to share my screen right now, and we're going to hop over to my slideshow, okay? And we're going to use this to guide us. Again, this is not the end all be all of what Judaism says about these topics. This is a taste. All right, this is a taste. This is a good either introduction for some or continuation for others. But I like to call this, does Judaism favor a vegan diet? Right? It's probably a question most people have never heard. And if they did hear it, they'd probably say no. I, having been vegan now for many, many years and studying this topic for basically 2 decades, you can guess how I would answer that question. Okay, but we'll share the sources, we'll talk about the sources, and we'll let the sources talk for themselves. Okay, just for those who are interested, I do have a website. It's my name, akivagersh.com/vegan rabbi, and there you can find all kinds of other sources. You can find videos of mine, interviews, webinars I've done, as well as articles I've written about this topic. There is also an online course for those people who are really interested in this and want to go deeper. It's a 6-class video series that goes into dozens and dozens, many, many different sources, from the Talmud to Jewish law, from the Torah to Jewish philosophy and Jewish mysticism. So let's begin, okay? Let's begin almost at the beginning, okay? We're looking at Bereshit chapter 1, Genesis chapter 1, all right? And I just want to, let's look at this verse and I'll share with you a little vignette, personal story. So we see, creation of the world, God creates the world, 6th day, humans are created. And in verse 28, it says, God blessed them and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. I just want to share with you a personal story that when I was in college as an environmental studies major, I took this environmental philosophy course. And in that course, we read an essay by a man named Lynn White, who in the 1960s wrote this article basically blaming the Bible for the environmental disasters that we're experiencing today. Called it the Judeo-Christian tradition. But basically that article and the conversation or discussion that ensued, led by my professor after we read it, and when we were discussing it in class, basically blamed the Bible for the way humans treat the environment. And the verse that was blamed specifically was this verse, okay? And it's pretty clear, it's in black and white. God said to the first humans, fill the earth, overpopulation, and master it. It's yours. Rule over the fish and the birds and all the living things. It's yours to do whatever you want with. Right? I give it to you. Right? Enjoy. And I remember when I was in that course and reading this essay we read and talking about it with our professor, I was convinced. The Bible is the reason, is the root cause for our modern day environmental destruction. And, I got really charged up about it, like down with the Bible, and I remember this, it was a very kind of profound moment for me, trying, to learn more about the roots of the modern environmental degradation that we were experiencing. So fast forward a few years when well, first, let's pause. Well, I'll say this, and then I'll pause. Fast forward a few years, I become religious, right? Or I come to Israel for the first time. I was not yet religious. I was in Jerusalem, and I got this desire as I'm getting more kind of acquainted with Judaism and getting more interested. I was in the old city in Jerusalem, and I said, you know what? I want to start learning the weekly Torah portion, right? As a kid, I didn't even know what that was. All right, I went into a local bookstore, found a Hebrew and English Torah, Chumash, and I bought it, and I found out that, wow, it was right after Simchat Torah, and we were beginning the Torah all over again. Like, that's perfect timing. So I opened it up to Genesis, and I'm learning this, and I get to this verse, I'm like, oh my God, I remember this verse from that course I took in college. That's the verse that is to blame for what's happening with the environment today. All right, kind of pause that little story. Let's go to our first source. This is from Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Samson Raphael Hirsch, right, in the 19th century, 1800s, founder basically of the modern Orthodox movement, all right, during post-Enlightenment. And he says, right, if we look at this verse from 28, right, chapter 1, verse 28, on the surface, it seems like God's giving, a blank check to the human beings. Do whatever you want with the earth because I made it for you, right? But then we see Rav Hirsch, and he writes so eloquently and so beautifully, and he says the following. And if I didn't tell you that this was a rabbi, not only a rabbi, a leading rabbi of the past few hundred years writing this, you probably think it was written by a poet. Right? And he says, the earth was not created as a gift to you. You have been given to the earth to treat it with respectful consideration as God's earth, and everything on it as God's creation, as your fellow creature, to be respected, loved, and helped to attain its purpose according to God's will. To this end, your mind is able to form the right image of all that exists. To this end, your heartstrings vibrate sympathetically with every cry of distress sounding anywhere in creation, and with every glad sound uttered by a joyful creature. To this end, you are happy when the flower blossoms and sad when it wilts. I'm not sure about you, but I've never heard my own rabbi talk like this. Yet he is talking from a place of strong connection to the Jewish tradition, to the sources in Torah, and to Jewish learning. Yes, he had a beautiful style of writing, but it was all based on Torah. It was all based on Jewish thought, values, and ethics. Right, there's another source. I didn't include it in here, but I'll just say it out loud. There's a midrash from the book of Kohelet that says at the very beginning of creation, God took Adam and Eve on a grand tour of the world, and said, "Look, here's the world. I made it all for you. It's all the beauty in it. I made it for you." But this, and again, that sounds just like this verse 28 from chapter 1, like God gave us the world. It's for us. We can do whatever we want. But then God issues a warning at the end of this story told by the Midrash. And it says that God said to Adam and Eve, right, but just be very careful not to destroy it. Because if you destroy it, nobody will come after you to fix it. Right? So with this ancient teaching from the Midrash, this modern teaching from Rav Hirsch, we see there is this strong Jewish ethic that we are here not as the owners of the world, but as the caretakers of the world. It is our job as human beings, and specifically as Jews, to take care of God's creation. God gave us an immense amount of responsibility. Right? Incredible power, incredible abilities, but with that power and with those abilities comes this incredible responsibility. And we see that in these sources. All right, let's go back to that vignette that I was sharing with you, okay? I'm in Jerusalem, I'm reading the Torah really for the first time in my life. I get to verse 28, I'm like, oh my God, that was the verse from college. And then I get to verse 29. And I kid you not, this is the first time I was 22 years old, and I'd never learned Torah really before. And I'm learning it on my own in English. And I get to verse 29, and it says, God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. And I'm thinking like, wait a minute, what? Read that again. And I read it again. And I'm thinking to myself, did God give the first humans a vegan diet at the beginning? And I'm looking through all the commentary in this, English version Chumash that I'm learning, and I see right there in the bottom, it says, Rashi says, the first humans, Adam and Eve, were not permitted to eat meat. They were not allowed to kill animals for food. And that permission wouldn't be given until the generation of Noah after the flood. And I'm completely blown away. Because here I am, a vegan already for 3 years. I'm Jewish, yet nobody ever told me in my life that in our holiest and most important text, in verse 29, it's written that God gave a vegan diet to humanity at the beginning of humanity. And that vegan diet will last not only for Adam and Eve, definitely not only for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, they're only there for 36 hours, but for over 1,500 years, according to the calculation of the Torah, until the generation of Noah after the flood. I was absolutely in shock. I was very happy to read this, absolutely in shock that I never once heard anybody talk about this Jewish idea that humanity in its beginning stage was vegan according to the Jewish tradition. All right, so that's pretty powerful. Right? I like to say Adam and Eve were vegan, right? Because they were their entire lives. 930 years says that Adam lived. That's 930 years of eating a vegan diet, right? And some people say it's not good for you. All right. Anyway, let's go to another source. All right. And again, I'm really just sharing with you a sampling of sources. But again, please know that this is just a sample, and there's so many more out there. Let's go to another modern source, Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik, right, the one who continued, the leadership of the modern Orthodox movement into America. And in one of his books, also an eloquent writer and speaker and teacher, in his book, The Emergence of Ethical Man, right, and probably nobody would ever equate Rav Soloveitchik with veganism, okay? But yet there he says in his own words in this book the following. He says, there's a distinct reluctance, almost an unwillingness on the part of Torah to grant man the privilege to consume meat. Man as an animal eater is looked at askance by the Torah. There are definitive vegetarian tendencies in the Bible, he says. Animal hunters and flesh eaters are people that lust. Of course, it is legalized, approved, yet it is classified as ta'ava, lust, repulsive, and brutish. This is Rav Soloveitchik talking. If I went to Yeshiva University and said these exact words, nobody would listen to me. And if I opened up the book and said, this is where Rav Soloveitchik said it, they too would probably be absolutely shocked. Right? Yet he said it. Right? Because why? Because he learned Torah to the depths of the depth. Let me just give a little context to this quote of his. As I said, we know that Adam and Eve were vegan. First diet 1.0 for humanity was completely vegan. That lasts until after the flood. After the flood, God does give permission to Noah. That's another verse, to eat meat. There's various reasons that are explained for that. One of the reasons that's brought down most popularly that I've seen to understand why humans were all of a sudden given permission to eat meat is that their spiritual level was much lower than it was before. I mean, that was why there was a flood in the world, right? God didn't bring a flood for no reason. God brought a flood because humans had greatly and gravely veered from their intended path. So after the flood, human beings were on a much lower spiritual level. And according to various sources in Judaism, right, it says that God felt that humans would not be able to not express their desire to eat meat anymore because of their lowered spiritual stature, and therefore God, out of reluctance, like Rav Soloveitchik says, gave permission to humans to eat meat. Okay, so that they, one, don't eat each other. Okay, that's brought down in the sources, and number two, that they realize that they are not the same as animals. That there is a difference. That they don't lower their moral standards to the level of animals. That yes, while everything's created by God and all of creation is from God, there is still a difference between humans and animals, and human beings were missing that point. And so that's another reason given why humans were given permission for the first time to eat meat, right, in order to understand that. Okay, that's the context, right? But many sources, including Rav Soloveitchik, and we'll see one or two more, say that God gave it with great reluctance because it wasn't the way it was supposed to be. It wasn't the ideal. How do we know it wasn't the way it was supposed to be? How do we know it wasn't the ideal? Because the first diet that God gave humanity was a vegan diet, a completely vegan diet, right? And only afterwards, after they lowered their spiritual level, was meat allowed. But look at what Rav Soloveitchik says at the bottom. Oftentimes in the Torah and Jewish literature, eating meat is connected to this Hebrew word ta'ava. Ta'ava means lust. Right? That it's a negative term. It's a word with a negative connotation, something we're supposed to stay away from, that we're not supposed to give into. Right? And he himself says, right, animal hunters and flesh eaters are people that lust. That yes, of course. I mean, nobody's going to argue this. I'm not going to argue against this. Of course, Judaism allows us to eat meat. Of course, 1,000,000%. But is it the ideal way to eat? Right? And how is meat understood in Jewish thought, right? And like Rav Soloveitchik brings himself, is often connected to this idea of ta'ava, of lust, that when we eat meat, we're coming from this place in ourselves that can't control our own personal desires. Now, we have all kinds of desires, but this kind of desire is labeled, in his own words, as repulsive, all right? Let's go on. Also modern day source, Moshe Kasuta, who wrote his own commentary on the 5 books of the Torah, he also says, just to strengthen this point, apparently the Torah, he says, was in principle opposed to the eating of meat. When Noah and his descendants were permitted to eat meat, this was a concession, conditional on the prohibition of the blood. Let me just pause there and say, after meat was approved, allowed by humanity, God right away says, but don't eat the blood. Don't eat the blood. You're allowed to eat the meat, you can't eat the blood, right? And so he's talking about that, right? This prohibition implied respect for the principle of life, for the blood is in the life, it says in the Torah, and an allusion to the fact that in reality, all meat should have been prohibited. This partial prohibition was designed to call to mind the previously total one. So what is Rabbi Kasuto saying? He's saying that at first all meat was prohibited. Then humans were allowed to eat meat, right, as a concession. But blood was still not permitted. Why was blood not permitted? To remind us that once upon a time, all meat consumption was prohibited, right? So we're still not allowed to eat something of the animal, so that we remember that eating meat altogether is a concession and not the ideal in the eyes of God, the Torah, or Judaism. Okay? Ad Khan, let me just say, Ad Khan, I've said nothing of my own thoughts. These are all bringing Jewish sources, right, to the table. Abarbanel, Rav Yitzchak Abarbanel, all right, a gadol of Torah from the Middle Ages. He also says in his writings, when God gave permission to Noah and his children to eat meat, he said, however, your blood, which belongs to your souls, I will demand. It's a very strange verse, right? When meat is allowed, but the blood is not permitted. And then he goes on to say, because why? Because God was concerned, check this out, this is pretty intense and heavy, because God was concerned that due to the cruelty and hostility that will be born in them as a result of eating meat, they will kill each other. I mean, I've never gone to a Shabbat morning class with a rabbi, and he's talking about this, that, we're not allowed to eat the blood because God was worried that by eating meat, we become so hostile and cruel that we might start killing each other, God forbid. All right, but this is what the Abarbanel, one of the greatest rabbis of the last 1,000 years, writes, right? That God had to say, immediately after God allowed humans to eat meat, God said, basically, what is he saying here? He's saying, but don't kill each other. You can kill animals for meat now. You can't, but don't think that you're allowed to kill other humans now, right? Why did God have to say that? That should be such an obvious, but it wasn't, because God was concerned, according to the Abarbanel, that because humans were going to start eating meat, that cruelty and hostility would come into them in a whole new way, that they might start killing each other. So God had to warn them against killing on. Another very well-known rabbi, the Kli Yakar, has a well-known commentary on the Torah from Prague, and he writes the following. Okay, let's just understand this. Let me say a couple things outside first. Okay, we know at the beginning humanity was given a purely vegan diet. Then after Noah, about 1,600 years later, they're allowed to eat meat with concessions about the blood. right? This is all pre-Judaism, right? And then Judaism is born, right? Moses, Exodus, we're learning it in the weekly Torah portion now. We leave on Sinai, we get to Torah, the Jewish people are born, Judaism is born. And we know, of course, meat is still allowed to be eaten. And with it comes many, 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 many laws, all right, of meat, of slaughter, of salting, of shechting, of meat and milk, you know, your kitchen, your dishes, your forks. I mean, a million and one different laws having to do with milk and meat. So what does the Clear Car say? Right? He says in the 16th century, right? He says, what was the necessity for the entire procedure of ritual slaughter, right? Which is not simple. I mean, in order for kosher meat to be kosher, the animal had to be slaughtered by a ritual slaughterer, a shochet, someone who trained. It's basically like studying to become a rabbi. All right. I mean, in most cultures around the world, you get an animal, you kill it, you eat it. You don't need to bring it to a trained specialist on how to properly kill the animal, yet Judaism requires it. Okay, so what does he say? What was the necessity of this whole procedure of slaughter? For the sake of self-discipline. And he says it is far more appropriate for a man not to eat meat. Only if he has a strong desire for meat does the Torah permit it. And even this only after the trouble and inconvenience necessary to satisfy his desire. Perhaps because of the bother and annoyance of the whole procedure, he will be restrained from such a strong and uncontrollable desire for meat. Wow. Right? Again, he's linking meat with desire. In this case, he says uncontrollable desire. And he basically calls, you know, pages and pages and pages and pages of Jewish law having to do with kosher slaughter a trouble and an inconvenience that maybe was put there in the first place to cause us to not to want to eat meat anymore, because who wants to go through all that trouble? Now, of course, today, barely anyone goes through that trouble anymore because it's all done for people. It's all done behind the scenes. And all you have to do is go to the store, pick out the package of meat from the refrigerated meat section in your supermarket and go home and eat it. Everything's been done for people today. But it used to not be the case. Right? People at the very least would do the salting, the plucking, right? The preparing, all the different things. All right, they'd bring the animal themselves to the one who's going to slaughter it. They would witness it. They would watch it. They would see it. They were part of it. Right? It's a very, very different world today. Moving on. All right, there's a few more sources, and I do want to respect time here. All right, Rav Kook. So first, let's just understand Rav Kook is one of the major modern sources when it comes to Judaism, animal welfare, and veganism. Okay, he himself was a vegetarian during the week. And they say he would eat a little bit of meat on Shabbat just to show that we're not yet there. All right, what do I mean by that? I'll just say before we share this source that's on the screen, Rav Kook believed. Well, let's look at the source and then I'll share that. Rav Kook said the following, right, having to do with covering the blood. All right, very powerful words. And again, another incredible and poetic writer. Rav Kook says about the covering of the blood, he says, covering the blood of the beast and fowl is a kind of divine protest against the permission to eat meat, which is fundamentally conditional upon the corrupt state of the human soul. What's Rav Kook saying? First of all, Rav Kook wrote a lot. And after he died, his writings were organized into all different kinds of books. All right, one of the books, it's more of a pamphlet, was called A Vision of Vegetarianism and Peace. It was organized by his leading student, David Cohen, who was a Nazir. They called him the Nazir of Jerusalem. He didn't cut his hair, he let it grow long. And this source that we're looking at right now is contained in that pamphlet, A Vision of Vegetarianism and Peace. You can find it online. All right, and Rav Kook says there that covering of the blood, right? There's a mitzvah to cover the blood for a wild animal that is killed and used for food, right? A kosher wild animal. The blood needs to be, after slaughter, the blood needs to be covered by dirt. You can't let it just lay there exposed on the ground. It has to be covered by dirt. It's like actually a mitzvah, all right? And so Rav Kook is saying the covering of the blood of these animals is kind of like a divine protest against the permission to eat meat, which according to his writings in general, the only reason humans were allowed to eat meat in the first place was because of their corrupt moral state. He goes on to say, the Torah, however, declares, cover the blood, hide your shame and your moral weakness, even though humanity has not yet reached the level which it is capable of reaching, of understanding that one should not take the life of any living sentient being out of necessity or craving. All right, Rav Kook was of the belief, all right, that one day we would return to the original vegan diet, all of us, all of humanity. All right, very, very powerful idea. And he says that actually right here in our next source, also part of this there, referring to the original vegan diet. Is it possible? And then let me just say this, sorry. Let's just understand who Rav Kook was. Let me just get a thumbs up that my internet connection is still okay. You can hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. Rav Kook was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of pre-state Israel. He was born in 1865, died in 1935. He came to Israel in 1904. He became the chief rabbi of Jaffa, then Jerusalem, and then all of pre-state Israel. He was a major rabbinic figure in his day, one of the leading rabbis of his generation, and I think some would say over the past 500 years. He left us volumes and volumes of his writings. He was a poet, he was a Kabbalist, he was a mystic, and he was a deep knower of the Torah and all of its nuances. All right. So he says, regarding this original diet, is it possible to conceive that a highly valued moral virtue, which had already existed as part of the human legacy, should be lost forever? He's talking about the original vegan diet. It was already established from the point of view of the intellectual prompting. That's a poetic phrase he uses, mystical poetic phrase, which is hidden in the depths of the Torah. That the very same permission to eat meat granted after the flood was not intended to be the actual practice for all time. For how is it possible for a lofty and enlightened moral condition, once instituted, to vanish as though it had never been? Right? Rav Kook looks at that original vegan diet as like the ideal way of being. And he's like, there's no way it's not going to come back one day. It has to. Why? Because it was a moral virtue, right? And we only lost it because of our moral corruptness, he says. He said, but one day we're going to get back there. And that's why he would eat a little bit of meat on Shabbat, because according to his idea was, as he talks about in other parts of this pamphlet that I mentioned, that it's a process. So we can't jump there, right? That we need to first really take care of the human family and how we deal with the human family and our kindness and compassion to other humans. And then we can spread that to the animal world, right? So that's why he was vegetarian during the week, but ate a little bit of meat, according to his students, on Shabbat, to show that it's the ideal, but we're not yet there, okay? A lot of people use that as an argument against veganism today, right? Because you say, look, even Rav Kook, he ate a little bit of meat on Shabbat, to show that we're not yet there, right? I and other people would say, very humbly, right? He died in 1935, right? Really before the intensity of the industrial meat, dairy, and egg industries came into being. Yes, they were starting, but nothing like we have today, and not nearly close to the number. We have tens of billions, I think 50, 60, 70 billion animals that are killed every year to be used for meat, to feed humans. Not even to feed humans, to give them, meat meals, all right? And that only happens because of the overly industrial way that they are raised, treated, and killed. All right, so I believe, I don't know, but my belief is that if Rav Kook was alive today, he would be horrified by the way that animals are raised for meat today. And he too, I'm just guessing, I could totally be wrong, but I would imagine he said the time has come, right? That he wouldn't even have a little piece of meat on Shabbat. But that's just my guess. Anyway, let's go a little bit more ancient, right? Because there are many ancient sources as well that have to deal with this. I'll go through a couple more. Let me just see where we're at. Yeah, just two more sources, and then we'll open to any questions people might have. This is from the Talmud, from the Gemara, right? Recorded 1,500 years ago in the Gemara tractate called Pesachim. And this is a very big idea. I'm going to really briefly share it. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think it's interesting to share. It says in the Gemara in Pesachim, it says that it is taught, Rebbe says that an Am Haaretz, ignoramus, someone who does not know Jewish law, is forbidden to eat meat, is forbidden to eat the meat of an animal. What? Who's ever heard of that? There's a Jewish teaching that says an ignoramus is forbidden to eat meat. Now let's just be clear here. We're talking about 1,500 years ago, right? Before there was like YouTube and social media and like a million distractions in our life. Someone who's an ignoramus back then, right, would probably be like known as a rabbi today, in terms of their level of knowledge and understanding. I mean, back then, all they had was Judaism, basically. Okay. And yet they say that an ama aretz, an ignoramus, is forbidden to eat meat. Why? Because it says in the verse, this is the Torah of the animal and the bird. The Gemara then goes on to say, anyone who engages in Torah study is permitted to eat meat. Anyone who does not engage in Torah study is forbidden to eat meat. Wow. That would knock out probably 80% of the Jewish population from eating meat today. All right. Let me just give you my quick understanding of this teaching. This is my commentary. Okay. It says whoever learns Torah can eat meat. Whoever doesn't learn Torah cannot eat meat. The simple understanding of that is there's, as we said before, there's so many laws about slaughter and salting and kashrut that you have to really know the laws really, really well so you don't mess up and wind up eating something not kosher. Okay, so that's why you need to study Torah in order to eat meat. That's a simple understanding, but there's always a deeper understanding with Judaism. And this is what I think the deeper understanding is. Anyone who engages in Torah, the word in Hebrew is osek, from the word la'asok, to really deeply dive into Torah. Meaning what? Whoever really refines his or her spiritual consciousness and awareness, that person is allowed to eat meat. Why? Because he or she will understand, according to other teachings in Judaism, specifically the Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, that when we eat, we have the ability to do great tikkunim, as it's called, spiritual fixings. That in every piece of food, there are sparks of holiness trapped, according to the Kabbalah. And when we eat our food with intention, with spiritual awareness and intention, we're able to elevate these sparks, and that helps to elevate the world, to fix the world, tikkun olam, fixing the world. Yes, according to Kabbalah, eating in a holy and a thoughtful manner helps to fix the world, helps in tikkun olam. But it says in the Kabbalah that the hardest sparks to elevate are those found in meat. Someone has to be at a very high level spiritually to elevate the sparks of holiness that are trapped in meat specifically. And that's why I believe, and other people believe, that this Gemara is really talking about that. That if you don't engage in Torah deeply, meaning you haven't refined your spiritual sense and self to a deep level, you don't have the ability to raise these sparks. Therefore, you have no reason to eat meat. Right? That's a very powerful thing. Right? I think we can probably say, with all due respect, that most people today don't eat with that kind of intention, specifically hamburgers, hot dogs, ribs, and chicken wings. All right. And even if they did, the question still remains: all the pain and suffering that the animals are going through, right, in the way that they're raised, is it worth it? Right. Let's just say that. I mean, if it's not obvious to everyone already, the way that animals are raised today, the tens of billions that are killed every single year for meat, for meals, for humans, are raised in intense ways, to say the least. From birth until death, they suffer. Right, dairy cows, they're forcibly impregnated, right, in order to have a baby so that they can produce milk. As soon as the baby is born, the calf is taken away from them. They mourn the loss of their baby. Their milk then is taken from them and brought into the dairy industry. This will happen four or five times throughout their life, right, until they can no longer produce at a high level of quality, and then they're killed for their meat. All right. And over the dead birds. Right? Every single day, dead birds are collected in these places because of the overcrowdedness. They're not allowed outside. They're given food that they don't normally eat. Right? They become products. They have become products in the eyes of humans, just to make more and more food, which for these companies means more and more money. Right? I'm just giving small details here. There's so much more. All right, the last slide comes from another Gemara, the Talmud in Chulin. In a very typical Talmudic fashion, it takes a verse and it does a commentary on it. And it takes the verse where it says in Leviticus, why does it say who traps? From the verse, and if any Israelite traps an undomesticated animal or bird. And the Gemara goes on to say that the Torah is teaching proper behavior, that a person should only eat meat after this type of preparation. What does that mean? Let me just say this is one of many passages in the Talmud that deals with eating meat. There's many other commentaries. Again, this is the last one that we're going to be looking at, but know that it's just a drop in the bucket. All right, and the Gemara is basically saying that just as the meat that one traps is not readily available, so too one should not become accustomed to eating meat. This was written 1,500 years ago. The primary Jewish text, the Talmud, is saying that don't get used to eating meat. You shouldn't eat it all the time. You shouldn't get used to eating it. Yes, you're allowed to eat it. We know that. But don't make it a part of your regular diet or habit, right? That one should not become accustomed to consuming meat. And Rashi, the medieval Torah commentator from about 1,000 years ago, who, the most famous Torah and Talmud commentator that there is, says, as if the animal was trapped. Treat the animal as if it was trapped, as if it wasn't readily available to the person. And then he tacks on and he says this: one should not eat meat frequently so as not to become poor. Okay? One should not eat meat frequently so as not to become poor. Now, I think 1,000 years ago, Rashi meant, look, meat is expensive. It's a whole process. It's not simple. You have to pay more money for it. So don't eat too much meat because you're going to spend a lot of money on meat and therefore you're going to become poor, God forbid. I think in our modern day times, we have to have a different understanding of this statement by Rashi, because we know that today meat has become very, very cheap, right? Relatively. Why? Because of the industrial way that it's raised and killed. Right? People can go to fast food places and get, burgers for nothing. Okay, you can eat them as much as you want. When I was a kid, I didn't mention this before, I literally ate meat 2 or 3 times every single day. I ate meat 2 or 3 times a day. Okay. What I think the modern day interpretation could be, maybe should be, of this last line of Rashi is that we cannot eat meat so frequently today so as to make us poor and our world poor. What does that mean, that we become poor and our world becomes poor today? All of the negative impacts of the meat, dairy, and egg industries on human health. How much money is spent on human health unnecessarily because people are eating in a way that is unhealthy for them and causes all kinds of issues and disease. That's one way it's making us poor. What is it doing to the animals? Our morals have just plummeted. Right? We know today, we live in a world where we know, right? 20, 30 years ago is behind closed doors, before YouTube and Facebook and all these things. Who knew how the animals were treated? Nowadays, we can't not know. And if we do know and we don't do anything about that, what is that saying about us and our morals, right? With all due respect, okay? That could be another way that we're becoming poor as a result. What about the environment? I mean, I'm not going to throw numbers at you right now, but it's all available online. If anybody wants those numbers, get in touch with me through my website. I will happily share these numbers with you. The impact of the meat, dairy, and egg industries on the soil quality, on the air quality, on the water quality is absolutely detrimental. It is one of the leading causes of air pollution, of water pollution, of streams getting polluted. People are even heavily linking it, and many sources. I've seen many sources connecting it to climate change, right, and some of the biggest global issues that we're dealing with today. All right, so when Rashi says that we shouldn't eat meat too much because it will make us poor, I think we really need to understand it in the modern day context and really see the negative impact of a meat animal-based diet that is happening on us humans, specifically on animals, of course, and even the global environment. And taking all that together, I'll just end with this one thought, that when we look at Jewish values, and we look at Jewish ethics, and we look at Jewish teachings of the past 3,000 plus years, we know the overarching theme of Judaism is that we are here to make this world a better place. We are here to give. We are here to be kind. We are here to be compassionate. We are here to be co-partners with God in making this world the best world it can possibly be. Well, if there's something so disastrous, like continuing to raise animals for food and eat them, right? I think we can say, at least we can ask the question, right? Has it come time to reconsider the way we've been eating for all this time? Right? And I would say for sure, yes. I think Judaism would say yes, that at the very least, it should be a question that we're asking and a conversation that we're having. And again, these sources that I share with us, with all of you today, is just a drop in the bucket, is just the beginning. There's so much more. And that makes me feel really proud that my own Jewish tradition has so much to say about this and has been saying this now for thousands of years. So again, I just want to say, thank you to everyone for participating, for joining, for being here, and a special thank you to Liad and friends for organizing this and making this happen. I know it's not your typical, maybe Jewish Zoom program topic, but I really appreciate that everyone is and was open to this program. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure listening to you, and it's we could hear the passion when you were talking. The passion is so obvious. But we are not going to let you go yet. We have 10-15 minutes, hopefully, for questions. What I liked about your journey as someone who's very passionate about animal rights and meat-free diet is that your journey hasn't started after you became a religious man. You were aware of, you had this awareness about your responsibilities or your roles in this world on earth in terms of your relationship with animals, and I think finding out about what the text says was a nice little surprise for you, just to support your belief or your choice, which is great. Which is, I'm sure, even if you found certain texts saying that no, eat meat 5 times a day, it wouldn't still change your mind about where you are standing, and your choice of not eating blood. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And I would like to let our friends to ask their questions. So I'm just going to quickly have a look. Jonathan, I can see one question from you. Would you like to ask your question, Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks very much, Rabbi Gersh. That was fascinating. I've got quite a few questions, but I'm not going to steal other people's time. But I guess the first one is there evidence that vegans live longer and are less susceptible to disease, e.g., cancer and diabetes? Do we have medical quantitative evidence that veganism is better for you? A, is it better for you than eating meat? And B, is it better for you than vegetarianism?
So it's a great question. So there are sources. I don't have them, in my hands right now, but I can easily send those to you. I've seen in my own research and my own learning, I've seen many different articles that quote medical research showing that there definitely is an advantage to the vegan diet and its impact on our health in general, but specifically with some of those diseases and issues that you mentioned, and many more. And I've seen, specifically, talking about heart disease and diabetes, obesity, all of that being, addressed, and specifically how veganism, really lends a helping hand and a healing hand when it comes to those. So there is definitely, the research is out there. It has been done and it's available, and either you can find it online yourself, or I'd be happy to pass on some things to you that I found.
Super. Jess Freeland, you have a question? Shall I read it, Jess?
Hi. No, someone kindly, hi, Rabbi Gersh, thank you very much. That was a great talk. I was asking if you had a fail-proof cannella recipe. Someone's kindly shared in the chat that they use flaxseed. Maybe you've got something else that you go to.
That's really funny. I think that's one of the hardest things to make vegan, but it's not impossible. And I have heard the flax seed alternative. I've tried a few times to make vegan, Canedalach matzo balls, right? Sometimes it's come out better, sometimes less, but I haven't experimented enough. So I will say that. And I haven't tried the flax seeds yet either, so I probably should. I just kind of opted out on the matzo balls in that one, but I have such good memories of matzo balls growing up that I should probably try again. But yes, flax seeds are really good. There's lots of great egg alternatives. My go-to one, which I learned in college, 20 years ago, I think since then, the vegan food world has just, blown up so much that there's so many other ways to do it. But my classic one, it might not sound so good, but it is pretty awesome. And it's a little bit of a mini science experiment in your kitchen. For every egg that you need, this is really good for baking specifically. For every egg that you need, you do a tablespoon of oil, a tablespoon of soy milk, and a teaspoon of baking powder. Mix it really well. Let it sit in a glass on your counter, and literally you can watch it foam up to quadruple the size. It's really cool to see, and it works really well in baking. It doesn't work as well in matzo balls, believe me, I've tried, but I'm sure other things are better.
Thank you. I'm just going through the questions. There's really good conversation going on here. Corinne, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi there.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I thought oops, there I am. Yes. Yes, I had a question, which was, what are your views about organic food, please?
Organic food?
Yes. Is that slightly better than, sorry?
I love organic food, and I'm very pro-organic, and as much as I can, I eat organic. For sure, for me, learning about organic kind of took place simultaneously as I was learning about vegetarianism and veganism. So, it really was born out of a greater environmental ethic that I was developing many years ago, over 20 years ago. So yeah, for me, not that they go hand in hand, they are different issues, but they are definitely connected. So yeah, I try as much to eat organic. Certain things are easier here in Israel than they were in America, and certain things are harder, or at least much more expensive. Unfortunately, organic fruit here is incredibly expensive. Triple the price at least than it was back in America when I lived there. So unfortunately, I don't always do the organic fruit thing, but as much as I can, organic vegetables and organic products. And organic flour, so as much as we possibly can. My coffee is organic coffee beans and organic rice milk. So you can say l'chaim to that.
I was thinking more about animal welfare. How does that sit with you? Organic meat, for example, or organic welfare.
I'm sorry,
I was thinking about the welfare of animals. Sorry, when I asked the question. Not so much organic veg and fruit, but I'm vegetarian, so I'm totally on your side. But I was just interested in your views about people eating organic meat as opposed to just eating meat which is not organic.
Gotcha. Okay, I understand. So that's like a big topic, so I don't want to take too much time with that.
Yes, of course.
I put in the chat both my website and my email address. People can totally feel free to get in touch with me directly about any question or anything afterwards. So you can find it in the chat. But I'll just say this really briefly because it is a big topic. It's definitely, organic, grass-fed, free range. All those things are much better than the standard mainstream way of raising animals. But unfortunately, those industries as well are filled with flaws and pain and suffering for animals. I know, when to call eggs or free range, it's a pretty low standard, like really, really low. not, these images that we have in our mind of happy chickens just running around, and the farmer runs after them and picks their eggs, up off the grassy field. Like, I know that's a romanticized view of it, but it's still far from ideal, I believe. And I still believe, especially in our day today, it's so easy to eat vegan. It's so easy to find vegan food alternatives, products, that it's just getting easier and easier. When I became vegan like 26 years ago, I mean, there was like brown rice and tofu, like I never even knew of a vegan restaurant. And if I did, it was like the size of a closet. Today with the vegan products and the vegan restaurants and all of these incredible vegan food choices, it's only gotten easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's definitely gotten easier. And I just think that while organic, free range, all those things might be a step up and a bit better, in the end of the day, it's not as good as we could get. I say though, I hope that's not I hope it's not judgmental. But I believe that we can do much better than that, and especially when we see all of these Jewish teachings, when the ideal really is to get back to a vegan diet for humanity. We're living in the generation that has the easiest time ever with making that switch.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Please have a look at the chat. You will see David Erskine, and Emily are sharing some really good links, research mostly. Jonathan Fitzer?
Yes, hello, thank you very much. You mentioned that the original diet from Genesis was a vegan diet, and then we were given permission to eat meat at the time of Noah. Would you say that the prophet Isaiah and a few others prophesied at a time when it says, the lion will eat straw like the ox, and there'll be no more killing in my holy mountain? So would you say that we start on a vegan diet, we're going to go back to it eventually, and we may be beginning the process now of going towards this much better time, and we've sort of starting it now, as it were?
A really great question. I really do. I really, really do. And I just want to add, Rav Kook talks about this, that even this spiritual awareness will even spread to the animal kingdom. And he says that in the great future, animals will have a heightened spiritual awareness on the level of humans basically today. That they'll also advance and be elevated. And if you see in Genesis as well, even the animals were given an herbivore diet at the beginning. And then so it's great that you brought up that prophecy from Isaiah, that it seems according to that at the end of days, messianic age, whatever you want to call it, that they too will return to a completely herbivore diet. But I do believe, to more directly answer your question, it excites me to see. We're still dealing with major issues in the meat, dairy, and egg industry, just the destruction, unfortunately, that they bring into the world. But we are seeing incredible strides in the vegan movement, and it does get me excited. It does make me believe that people are feeling it more and more people are making that switch, and it seems to me that maybe this is the beginning of the beginning.
Great.
Super. Akiva, I've got a question. I found this really interesting news about 70 rabbis from around the world, from across the spectrum of denominations, have signed a declaration urging Jews to switch to a vegan diet. This happened about 3-4 years ago, apparently. Their argument is that vegan diet is, I'm just going through the news while I'm talking, vegan diet is almost by default a kosher kashrut diet, because there is no need to separate milk and meat plates. And when you simply go veg or vegan, you just follow the rule 100%. As well as this, we also know that Tel Aviv is a city that is leading. Correct me if I'm wrong, is the most vegan city in the world.
Yeah.
By population. Yeah. So just by looking at this two evidence, or two, evidence, yes. Could we say that veganism is a movement that is getting bigger among religious Jews or secular Israelis?
Definitely. I mean, per capita, Israel has the most vegans in the world per capita, right? At least 5% of Israelis, according to studies that were done recently, eat a vegan diet. And Tel Aviv specifically, they say, is the most vegan-friendly city in the world. I'm actually giving a lecture there next week about Judaism and veganism, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it's happening more in the secular world. I'll be honest with you. I wish it was happening more in the religious world. I think for various reasons, religious Jews, specifically Orthodox Jews, specifically Orthodox Jews, are very connected to their meat consumption, and they have this belief that you need to eat meat on Shabbat and the holidays, which is also not correct. That's a whole other issue, which I talk about and teach about. But you do see it really spreading it in Israel, in the world in general. I think a lot of Jews specifically, and I think it really taps into our Jewish values. I mean, you had mentioned before that I went vegan and then I became religious. And when I started to learn about Judaism after already being involved in activism and environmental activism and becoming vegan, and I started to learn all these Jewish teachings about these things, I started to realize, oh my God, I was being so Jewish all of these years. I never knew. Like, nobody told me that being an activist and trying to make the world a better place was such a Jewish thing. I mean, it sounds like, how did you not know that? I didn't know that. So I really do believe that, Jews, like when I was in college, I went to a college where there's 30% Jews, but if you went to an activist meeting, it was like 80% Jews. And there's just something in our kishkas, in our DNA, that really wants the world to be a better place. So I think it's very connected. Why Israelis, specifically Jews in general, are becoming vegan in greater and greater numbers as the horrors of these industries are becoming more and more known.
Yeah. Well, we are not going to let you go. We have some more questions.
That's why I made a coffee.
Okay. David, are you asking a question, or no? You're sharing some links with Jonathan. Guys, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask your questions. But we are 10 minutes over our time. We are keeping it Kiva. I'm sure he's okay.
I'm okay with it. If you guys are okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
as you can see, I like talking about this.
Super. Emily, have you got a question? Or your
Can I saw a question in the chat. Can I actually
yeah, please do. Yeah.
Sharna asked a really good question about how about substitutes for certain minhagim on the chagim, like fish head, Rosh Hashanah, and Pesach, Shenk, all that kind of stuff. I think it's so important for us to realize and to know as Jews that so many of the things we do with food are minhagim, are customs. They are not law. Nowhere in Jewish law does it say you have to have a fish head on the table on Rosh Hashanah. It is a minhag. It's a custom. It's okay. It's a custom. Our ancestors did it. That's very nice, right? But we don't have to do it. It doesn't make our Rosh Hashanah table, treif if we don't have a fish head. And if we don't have a shank bone on the Pesach table, that's okay. It's a custom. These are things just to stir up conversation and add to our experience, but we don't need them. And that goes for eating meat also on Shabbat and the Chagim. Nowhere, I'm telling you, please, nowhere. And I'm always up for a good argument, okay? But nowhere in Jewish law does it say that you have to eat meat on Shabbat or the holidays. Nowhere, okay? And what happens over, we've been, thank God, we've been around for so long. So many of our customs we turn them into laws in our heads. And I think we have to really realize, that that's not the case. Like, kaparot, using chickens, swinging the chickens around the head on the eve of Yom Kippur. No, you don't have to do that. You can use money. In fact, many rabbis say you shouldn't use the animals for all these kinds of reasons. But unfortunately, there are people who say, no, it has to be done this way for all these spiritual reasons. No, if it's causing pain and suffering to God's creations, there's nothing good that can come out of it.
Thank you. Have you got any more questions sent to you privately, Akiva? Because I don't have any more.
I just happened to notice that one, so I just thought it was a really good question because it covers so many different things. But I'm happy to take other people's questions if they have their hand up.
Any more questions? Yeah, Jonathan? Both
Why-
Jonathan.
You can go first, Jonathan.
Okay. Why is veganism halachically better than vegetarianism? Because drinking milk, for example, doesn't kill an animal.
Okay, really, really good question. So, you know, I mentioned before, I became vegetarian when I was 18 years old. And when I was 19, I went vegan. And for me, the reason I became vegan is because I realized that all the reasons I went vegetarian should be the reasons I go vegan. What do I mean by that? The way that chickens are raised for eggs in the mainstream industrial egg industry, which is what 99.99% of the people eat and support, is absolutely horrendous. And it goes against what I believe are Jewish values of compassion for animals, right? I didn't even mention, there's so many things to talk about here. I didn't even mention that the term tzar bali chayim, right? It's from it's mentioned in the Talmud that there's a mitzvah from the Torah to be compassionate to animals, to not cause unnecessary pain and suffering to animals. Tzar bali chayim is called. All right, so if you walk into any typical chicken coop, you will see right away that that value has been thrown out the window. All right, that's the egg industry, the dairy industry, as I mentioned before. Right, how does milk, how does milk come into our lives? It comes into in a very, very intense way. That these animals are treated like slaves, right? And it's a very intense thing and graphic thing to share, but we have to know this. Like I said it before, I'll say it again. Cows are artificially impregnated. Physically, I won't go into too much detail, but there's someone there who needs to put his arm into the body of this female cow to insert the semen. Okay, she gets pregnant, she has a baby, that baby is taken away from her right away, and it says in the Torah, it was specifically with the korbanot, but the sacrifices in the temple, but I think the value still exists, that you shouldn't take the baby away from the mother for at least 8 days, right? Because it's cruel. While the babies are taken away right away, and then the milk that's produced is taken as well, and that happens 4 or 5 times throughout her life, right, until she's killed. So, and the lives that they live, right, are once again they're living in cramped conditions. So you're right, you don't need to kill a chicken for the eggs, and you don't need to kill a cow for the milk. On some level, it would be better if they were killed, right, because their suffering would come to an end. They're living lives of complete suffering from the day they're born until the day that they die. And yeah, I think that speaks for itself.
Jonathan?
Yeah, am I muted? Yeah, good, yeah. Firstly, my chat facility doesn't work. Somebody asked me about that quote, I saw it come up about Isaiah. It's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 7 to 11. It's about Nemokli, my holy mountain, and that one. Also, would you say that milk should be allowed to be kosher because of there's far more suffering in the dairy industry and the meat industry, and all the dairy cattle, they all get killed after about 7 or 8 years. They generally get turned into burgers, sausages, mincemeat. So there's actually more killing and suffering in dairy. So I would say, and see if you agree, that actually the dairy industry is worse than the beef industry. Would you say that from your understanding is the case?
It's interesting. The more I learn about it, the more I would agree with that. I can't remember his name right now, but he's a very well-known speaker from America about veganism, and he says exactly that. He says he actually came to Tel Aviv some years ago, and he really changed a lot of people's minds here. Again, unfortunately, I can't think of his name right now, but he said exactly that the worst industry out there is the dairy industry for exactly the reasons that you're saying. A lot of the calves that are born to dairy cows, if they're males, they're killed instantly, right? They have no use for them, right? So yeah, there's a lot of horrors in the dairy industry that people don't realize. And I don't know what it's like in England. I imagine it's the same thing as in America. But in America, I grew up with images on the commercials and on the cartons, of happy cows and happy hens, and everything looks great. And Sunshine Farms, it's all advertising. It's all a big trick to make us believe that these are normal animal products coming from normal places where the animals are treated in very nice ways, and that's just clearly not the case.
Well, thank you so much, Akiva. I'm enjoying it very much, but I think we should say goodbye to you. You gave us extra 20 minutes almost. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing your passion with us. And like I said, I'm hoping that everyone will have some questions. Is there a question? Somebody's talking.
I can take one or two more questions if that's okay with you guys. I'm okay with it, but if you whatever you guys want.
I'm not sure whether it was a question or it was an accidentally.
Well, I think there are a couple of people with their hands up. So,
I can't see any. If you could just manage that would be great. Thank you.
Haranjit?
Yes, Charanjit is my name.
Right.
Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Akiva, you mentioned animals as sentient beings. I think you talked a little bit about that. And I'm just wondering, in relation to the golden rule, which is applied to some extent to humans, do you think it can be applied to animals from where you sit?
The golden rule being do as to others as you want to be.
Yeah.
That golden. Can you just explain or clarify just a little bit more how that would apply to animals?
Well, there is an organization called Animals Interfaith Alliance. I am not quite sure if you have come across them. And there is this feeling that in some ways we are treating, like dogs and others are treated very closely by humans as having human sort of views of life. But it's, in many cases, as you can gather, I come from Indian background. I have been living in the UK for almost half a century now. And there were no vegetarians except us at that time. It was quite unusual, or hardly any vegetarians. And now there are about 30% in some parts. So it's quite a rise in vegetarian, and I would say stroke vegan. And this is because of the way people are getting more and more feelings for looking at animals as sentient beings and actually looking at it in that context. So therefore, I feel that there may be some mileage in thinking about it in that way. I'm not so sure. I just wanted your answers in some ways, because you have spent quite a lot of years talking about and studying.
No, I agree. I agree with that. I think more and more people are really, looking. There are, again, what I brought up in this program is just a drop in the bucket. I said in terms of Jewish sources, but hold on one second. Just want to make sure my internet is okay. Hold on, I'm okay here. You can hear me because I got one of those messages about internet. You can hear me, okay? There are Jewish sources that say that we should be looking at the animals as our brothers and sisters in creation. Jewish sources that say this. So very much so. I definitely think that more and more people are waking up to that. It doesn't mean that we're the same as them. Right? Judaism definitely does recognize the fact that humans are different than other animals. I mean, we're the ones on Zoom right now, not like raccoons or turtles. We are clearly very different than all the rest of the animals in this world. We're sending rockets to space and inventing Zoom. but still, it doesn't mean that we don't have connections to them. And there's a beautiful source that says that human beings were created with a little piece of every single creature in creation within us. So definitely, and I think that awareness is really waking up today. And I think that is part of, not the only reason, but I do think it's part of the increase in the amount of vegans, because they really are seeing like these, right, I love my dog, I love my cat. That's easy. But what about the goat? What about the cow? What about, the pig? I know Jews, we don't talk about pigs, but all these other beings. And I recently visited a farm sanctuary here in Israel, and it really opened my eyes to that. Like, you go to this farm sanctuary where they're taking care of all these animals that were saved from either the meat industry or animal experimentation world. And you see these goats running around this farm, and even the cows, and you feel like this could be a pet on some level, like you see their personality come out, you see their emotions come out. And the people who work there every single day, they talk about that. They say that to them, there's no difference between a dog, a cat, and a goat and a chicken, because when you spend enough time around them, you start to really see they are creatures, beings with a full range of emotions and personality. And I think that is part of the rise in veganism, that people are starting to realize, wait a minute, if I wouldn't eat my dog or a cat, why should I eat these other animals? Or if I wouldn't want my dog or cat to be, subjected to pain and suffering, why am I okay with all of these other animals? They're also sentient beings. So I think that definitely is part of what's happening, and it's pretty amazing, I think.
I mean, I just wanted to say, we are Sikhs by faith, Sikh faith. And one of the verses within our scripture says, if you think that God is in everything, then why kill a chicken?
What was the last thing then? Why what? I'm sorry?
Why kill a chicken? If God has created everything and God is in everything.
Right. Right. And when you go into the Hasidic teachings and the Kabbalistic teachings of Judaism, you get to teachings like that, of understanding that God is everywhere. God is in everything. There's a story of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement 300 years ago. And before he became well known as the teacher that he became, he was a shochet. He was a ritual slaughterer to make kosher meat. They say that he would sit with an animal for an entire day before he slaughtered it. He would sit with it, he would cry with it, because he understood the power of taking a life of an animal. It's very, 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 very powerful, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that point up. I think Jonathan has a question.
Yes. Before I ask my question, just following on from what Sharanjit said, in Psalm 145, verse 9, it says, the Lord is good to all, and tender mercies are over all of his creation. So I think that's pertinent. My question is, with Tu B'Shavat coming up, the New Year for trees, do you think it would be a good idea if it became customary for people to be vegan on that day and eat the produce of trees, like so have a nut roast? And if you want something, your tea and coffee, you can have a plant milk from trees, like coconut milk or almond milk or hazelnut milk. Do you think that would be a good idea, a good way of getting things started?
I think that would be a great idea. I think Tu B'Shvat is a great day that, it's kind of looked at as the Jewish Earth Day in certain communities. And I think it's a really great time, even though it's specifically about the trees, but it creates at least a space for conversation about these other issues that are also related to the environment. So I definitely believe that Tu B'Shvat is a great time to do that. And it's really amazing because Tu B'Shvat often falls out in January, and there's this custom in the vegan world, it's called the Vegan Annuary, where there's a global movement to encourage people to try veganism for 1 month, right, and see what it's like. And so we're 4 days into that, and I think it's really exciting that Tu B'Shvat takes place during this month as well.
Yeah.
There were some other people with their hands up. Shana Kinsley. Shana, would you like to unmute?
Sorry. It's not really a question, and just something a little bit interesting. So I know other people want to ask questions. I'll keep it really short. Quite interestingly, my uncle, who was one of the, I think the first lawyer actually for the state of Israel, actually for the state itself, he was a vegan in those days. It was so rare. And he lived till he was in his 90s. I could do handstands. And when he came to England, I just remember, because obviously I was very young when he died, but the thing I remember about him telling me my family were all walking animal graveyards. He was such an advocate for veganism. Yeah. And it was a of state. So that was all. Just reminded me of the statement of family having a family of walking animal graveyards. How he described people who weren't vegan.
Very interesting. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that. But it reminds me, I'll say really quickly, we're also in the month of Shvat. And if I can get a little bit mystical just for a moment, according to the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, every single month in the Jewish calendar has a spiritual component to it, a spiritual fixing. One month is our sight, how we see the world. Another one is our speech, how we speak. Our thoughts is another month. This month of Shvat, and Jonathan, this connects to what you said before, the month of Shvat that we're in now, that we just started the other day, the spiritual fixing of Shvat is our eating. It's our eating. Right? It's our eating with consciousness, with awareness, with intention. Sharna, you just reminded me that, I grew up, hearing, you are what you eat, from this guy called Mr. Body. I don't know if that got to England, but when I was a kid, there was a show called Mr. Body, and it was all about health. And he talked to kids about how you are what you eat. Well, there's a Jewish teaching that says the same exact thing. We are what we eat. And if we are eating food that has contained in it pain and suffering, then what does that mean for the people that we become as a result? And some people will even say, and this might be a stretch for some people, I get it, but some people might say, have said and do say, that one reason why there's so much pain and suffering in the world is because of the way that we treat animals, and then we ingest that pain and that suffering, and then we just, bring it back out into the world through our actions. So
I'm almost converted. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharna.
I think David Itkin has his. Yep.
Well, hello, good evening. Thank you very much for everything you said. Very, very inspiring. And as a committed vegan since about 7 years, I'm now moving towards plant-based as well. I sort of hover between being plant-based and vegan, depending who I'm talking to. But I wanted to ask you, after all the research and the incredible work you've done, is there a kind of a network of people helping to, to explain this to communities around the world? I'm in France, by the way.
Okay, very nice. Very nice. That's the amazing thing about Zoom, is that you can be talking to people from all over the world. It's really amazing. I know of organizations in America, two of them specifically. One is called Jewish Veg, and the other one is called Shemayim. I'll just put their names in the chat. And they're two amazing organizations who I'm connected to. And I know their leadership, great people. And they're really, their main focus is really spreading these teachings. In Israel, there's another rabbi. I'll put his name as well. Most of his stuff is in Hebrew, but every now and then he has some stuff in English. He's amazing, Rabbi Asa Kesar. Amazing teacher, also vegan, also a vegan rabbi. I haven't found any organizations in Israel that bring the Torah and veganism together, but there are us individuals who are doing it. There are definitely, as you can imagine, environmental organizations in Israel and lots of vegan activists in Israel. There's a great organization in Israel called Glass Walls, who I'm friends with the leadership as well. Tal Giboa, is one of Israel's leading vegan activists, if not the leading vegan activist, who founded this organization. What I'm finding in Israel, that while most of the vegans, at least that I've seen, and I think most people will meet, are secular. They're really, really open to hearing the Jewish side of it and the Jewish teachings. It's really inspiring to them. It's really gladdening. You know, they feel really good that our own tradition, you know, has what to say about it. But in terms of organizations and organizational work, I see it more in America right now. You know, maybe there's things happening in Europe, I'm just not aware of it, but definitely a lot of people working on the issue of veganism in Israel. And I'll just say, you know, as we say in Hebrew, bli ayin hara, you know, without the evil eye, I feel really blessed. I feel really, really, really blessed that I get to share this. I've been doing this on social media now for just about over a year. And thank God, the response has been really positive and tremendous. I do it on Facebook and on Instagram. I never was on Instagram before. I never thought I would be, but someone inspired me to bring my vegan rabbi work over to Instagram, and it's been tremendous there. And people really, really want to hear this. They really love it. So I feel like, you know, these days with social media, you don't always need an organization. You just got to be a person, you know, to share and to speak about it. And there's people who will want to listen. So I just have been really, I felt really, I don't know, a lot of appreciation that there's so many people who are interested.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. I see that comment by Sharna, right? And even meat reduction is a tremendous step forward for sure. So it's really nice to hear that Chief Rabbi Mirvis has said that. Mm-hmm. Oh, right, the Jewish Vegan Society, right? That's another organization. Thank you for bringing them up. Thank you. Is the V vegan or vegetarian? I forget. Maybe it's vegetarian. It is vegan. Okay. No, there's another. Oh yeah, I'll put down one more person.
It's Jewish Vegetarian Society, not vegan.
Is it vegetarian?
Okay.
But they turned to veganism about 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay. Here's another person you should definitely look up. His name is Richard Schwartz. He's kind of like the grandfather, so to speak. Don't tell him I told you that. He's kind of like the grandfather of the Jewish vegan movement. He's amazing. Thank God we're personal, you know, friends and colleagues, whatever you want to call us. He's written many books about this. He writes tons of articles about this, and he's just an incredible advocate for all of what we're talking about. Richard Schwartz.
It sounds like we're going to have to invite you again. We need more time. We need more time to discuss, to listen to you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure my friends enjoyed it as well. So we're gonna have to say goodnight to you.
Okay. Thank you. Really, Bimat, like from my heart, Liat, and everyone, thank you so much for being here, for making it happen. And really, it was a pleasure for me as well to be able to have this discussion with everybody. So really, toda rabba. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you.
Laila tov, Kiva.
Laila tov, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, whoever arranged it. And thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me. Thank you.
Liat was the organizer, so thank you, Liat.
Thank you, Liat.
Good night, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting.